Good evening. We meet on a wintry Thursday, but the discussion, I promise you, will be warm and perhaps hot. I'm Guthrie Munyuki. Tonight on the program, we're going to discuss the Zimbabwe gold, the ZIG, and other economic-related matters. And I have a very familiar guest on this program tonight, Dr. Prosper Chitambara. Dr. Chitambara, how are you?
I'm well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Winter is upon us, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
Is it going to be a long winter?
I don't think so. I don't think it's going to be a very long winter. From past trends, I think normally it's just 2 weeks of very, very cold weather. Then the rest, it will be just cool, not too cold.
Okay.
Yeah, but not warm either.
And Zimbabweans want to warm pockets, not cold pockets, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like any other rational economic beings or agents.
Sure. Dr. Chitambara, this year in April, we marked the first anniversary of the Zimbabwe gold, the ZIG. And when it was first introduced, it was backed by close to about 430 million, all inclusive US dollars. And now we see that actually almost doubling. Now the reserves that are backing the ZIG are actually 700 million.
Okay.
From the Arab, that's from the RRB side. That's the latest from the RRB side. And so there's this appreciation of the reserves. And then there's this lack of appreciation of what the ZIG can do for ordinary Zimbabweans.
Oh, yeah, it's like
What can be done for ordinary Zimbabweans to feel the effects, positive effects of the ZIG and having its value that is consistent?
So I think first and foremost, I have to highlight that the stability and sustainability of a currency is a function largely of inflation. So inflation, what it does is that it erodes the value of money. And of course, when inflation is chronically high, people then tend to lose confidence in that money or in that currency. So what we need to do is to sustain a low and stable inflationary environment over time. And when I say low and stable inflationary environment, I mean when our annual inflation rate is below, ideally it should be, we did a paper a few years back, and we actually found out that the optimal inflation rate for a country like Zimbabwe, is around 8%. So it means we need to reduce our inflation numbers to below 10%. Of course, if we can get to below 20%, I think that will be good. Currently, our annual inflation numbers, which is a key benchmark for May, the May numbers rather, 92.1%, an increase of about 6% from about 87% in April. So that's a bit worrying or a concern, because what high inflation does is that it sends what we call self-fulfilling rational expectations, in the sense that economic agents then anticipate that things are going to continue to, or prices are going to continue to increase, if you want. And that can leave us in a vicious cycle of chronic high inflation. So I think first and foremost, let's continue to work on our fiscal reforms and our monetary reforms, but also our institutional reforms, and even our debt reforms within the structured dialogue platform. The government has agreed to implement a number of reforms, both macroeconomic. I know we are going to shortly. I think government should be. Government is in discussions with IMF on a staff-monitored program. So I think that's coming on board shortly. But governance reforms are also critical. Government already agreed to implement governance and institutional reforms within that framework of the structured dialogue platform. So in short, what I'm saying is that we need to ensure that we have low and stable inflation, at least below 10% or over time. Then that will obviously result in an improvement in real incomes, but also a restoration of confidence and trust in the ZIG. Because one of our biggest problems, because of years of chronic high inflation and hyperinflation, is the massive erosion, the massive trust and confidence deficit in not just the ZIG, but also even in the institutions, our local economic institutions, in particular the central bank itself, following what has happened in the past. So that urgency problem, that trust deficit or gap, I think it takes a bit of time to rebuild trust and confidence in the central bank, but also even confidence in the local currency, which is the ZIG. So even when you look at countries that at some point dollarized, de-dollarizing or de-dollarization has been a challenge. Of course, it's a process which takes a bit of time. But most countries have not successfully de-dollarized in the sense that people still continue to hold a significant proportion of their cash or even their wealth in foreign currency.
Yeah. So what you're telling me is a stability that is dependent on other factors.
Yeah. But it's largely our capacity to implement, to continue to stay the course in terms of implementing fiscal and monetary austerity, but also even other key institutional reforms, for example, around parastatals. Because what happens is that if our parastatals don't perform well, the government has to subsidize loss-making parastatals. And that process of subsidizing can actually result in unsustainable growth in money supply, which can have a massive or significant destabilizing effect on the whole macroeconomy. So it's really interconnected, the linkages.
The new RBZ governor, Dr. John Mshayawan, a year in the office now, and from the time that he took office up to now, are you seeing something that we should smile about?
So I think the role of a central bank, number one, is to ensure price stability. Number two, to ensure, of course, price stability is also linked to exchange rate stability. So the central bank has targets around, say, inflation. For example, the target for this year is to get our inflation to below 30% by year end. Of course, the IMF and the World Bank are projecting that inflation will be around 26% by year end. But other multilateral institutions like Afrexim Bank, they are projecting inflation much higher in 3 digits, around almost 200%. Of course, those projections are based on different assumptions, especially around money supply growth and around even public spending.
Okay.
So
I'll come back to that point in the second segment.
I haven't fully answered the question that I asked, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Please join us in the second segment as we continue to talk about the state of the economy with a particular emphasis on the effectiveness of the ZIG. Welcome back. To those who are just joining us, we are in the middle of this week's program where we have our guest, Dr. Prosper Chitambara, and we've been discussing the ZIG. There are many people out there who are saying that, yes, we've been seeing some modicum of stability, but again, that does not translate into hot pockets. Others saying we need a hot pocket that is banned, and then we need to burn a hole in a pocket. So, stay tuned.
What I was going to say also is that even when you achieve stability, again, that's a means to an end. Because what most people are really interested in are, for example, the issue of jobs. So when you have stability without that stability resulting in creation of jobs, decent work opportunities for most people, I think that stability will be meaningless. You actually end up in what we call a stability trap, that the economy is stable macroeconomically, but no jobs are being created. There's no investment. So I think, yes, stability is critical. That's necessary. But over and above stability, we then need to make sure that our economy is creating a sufficient amount of jobs to absorb, especially the youth. We have a huge labor force. Most people are informally employed. So we need to be creating decent work opportunities for the people that require to work, that are looking for a job.
So you cannot expect a magic bullet.
No.
from the RBZ or from the government overall.
Unless you take out very drastic measures, like we saw Milei, the president of Argentina, has done what he has done in Argentina. And for the first time, I think last year, Argentina recorded both a budget and a current account surplus on account of very, very comprehensive macroeconomic reforms involving massive cutbacks, especially in public spending. I think they reduced even the size of government by almost a third. And that's beginning to have some impact. And even their inflation numbers have come down quite drastically.
Okay.
So, but those kind of reforms, they're very painful to implement, both economically and also politically. See, when you look at the political economy of reforms, it's very, very dangerous implementing those kind of drastic changes because there are people, there are strong vested interests that may stand to lose, and those people may, or those interests may then be a threat even politically. And
So, if I hear you,
even what Trump is doing, those very radical measures to cut back spending.
So, but in Zimbabwe, do we really need radical measures to make sure that we go back to have a single-digit inflation? We go back to have trust and confidence restored in the authorities and, of course, in our currency.
I think we don't necessarily need radical, but I think we need definitely our institutional reforms are critical in my view. We need very strong independent institutions, not just at the political level, but also at economic level, our parastatals, even the central bank itself. I know some have argued that the issues to do with the autonomy of the central bank, is it strongly autonomous? Is it strongly independent? When we talk about central bank autonomy, you're talking about how easy is it, for example, to hire and fire a central bank governor, or how easy is it for the executive to hire and fire? In some countries, it's very difficult. Like in the US, the president can't just hire and fire a central bank governor. Those are some of the indicators. So sometimes what then tends to happen is that there's a lot of influence from the executive on the central bank in terms of the management and the operations of monetary policies. It means a challenge in most low-income economies. Then, of course, you have the extreme of South Africa, where the central bank is actually in private hands. But generally, the more independent the central bank, the better the macroeconomic outcomes, or even the better the macroeconomic performance. So in Zimbabwe, in the past, we have had challenges with issues of central bank autonomy, where the previous governor, not the previous one, but the other governor, was actually saying or alleging that some of the things that they were doing through quasi-fiscal operations were directives from the Ministry of Finance or from the executive. So obviously that raises concerns and challenges around whether the central bank is autonomous or independent, or there are some people that call the shots from an invisible end, so to speak.
All right. So the story of Zimbabwe is a very interesting one.
The story of Zimbabwe,
particularly after from 2000 up to today.
Oh yeah.
When you look at when you look at what has happened, in the economy.
Yes.
So the ordinary people would want to feel the real value of the ZiG translating into their pockets and burning a hole in their pockets. They should not expect radical reforms. They should not expect revolutionary reforms.
I don't think so.
But incremental.
Yeah. I think that's the right word.
Okay. So when we've got incremental reforms,
with some probably occasional slippages here and there. So like we have seen in the past.
If we have incremental reforms, does this mean that it will take a while for us to go back to where we were?
It's going to take a while. I think given the state of our economy, I think it's going to take a while. Yes, it will be incremental. I'm sure eventually we'll get there, but it's not going to be an overnight thing that the ZiG is now very stable and internationally or regional or even internationally tradable. That's one of the key challenges that we're having, that our ZiG is not tradable internationally. So if you go
the issue of convertibility.
yes, but it is. That's a major challenge, which ultimately affects the sustainability and the stability of the ZiG. But again, that's a function of the overall state of the economy in terms of your competitiveness, your productivity, And also even the governance and institutional issues, they also play a part in terms of determining ultimately the sustainability of a currency. So both
So-
politics and the economics affects
So,
affects the currency.
so today, the front page of the Daily News,
Yes, yes.
they have this story where they've been talking about
You're
selling
selling.
fuel in Zig would be suicidal. So, given what you have just told me, are we likely to see a continuation of fuel, particularly fuel, being sold
Exclusively.
exclusively in US dollars? Given the
Yeah,
arguments
yeah.
that are being proffered, like you would actually create serious shortages, and that would result actually the serpentine queues that we used to see,
Yeah.
during the time of
I think
the
that
black market.
I think that risk will always be there. And when you do that, when you liberalize that market, it then means that the suppliers of fuel must be assured of a foreign currency. If they go to the bank, they'll be able to buy the foreign currency, be able to import. If that's, yes, we've seen our foreign currency inflows actually increasing. So I think it's feasible to do that. But eventually, I'm sure we'll get there. But there's need for that assurance that the foreign currency will be available to the fuel suppliers when they need it. Yeah, so currently it has been easier because it's fully dollarized. So there are no issues with fuel. We have had challenges with fuel in the past. Winding queues everywhere, and that affects the economy, that affects businesses. Households are also affected, yeah.
Okay.
So I think the issue of de-dollarization, in my view, is a very sensitive issue, given the issues that the trauma that we have gone through, like the fuel queues that we've highlighted, even the shortages. But once we're actually able to sustain discipline, especially monetary discipline, because in the past we know that the major driver of hyperinflation was high money supply growth, too much
Okay.
money chasing too few goods.
Okay,
And-
so
Yeah.
we'll conclude in the final segment
Yes,
with
yes.
having a discussion on that, because that's de-dollarization, because the two schools of thoughts with
Yeah,
regards to that.
yeah. Yes, yes.
And I think it is crucial that you try to address it for our viewers.
Yeah.
Why it is important to return to the full use and sole use
Yeah.
of the Zimbabwe, of the Zig or
Local
Zimbabwe local currency.
Yeah.
Please join us in the final segment as we bring to an end this week's program with Dr. Chitambara. Welcome back. And to those who are just joining us towards the tail end of this program, we've been discussing the economy, but with special emphasis on the value of the ZiG and the competitiveness of the ZiG. And of course, the modicum of stability that it has brought to the market. And crucially, that it is not going to be an overnight thing to simply have a ZiG that will have full value that is appreciated by the local Zimbabweans. Dr. Chitambara.
Maybe one point I should have mentioned, some observers are also saying that maybe the stability is it's artificial, in the sense that maybe government has not been doing a lot of payments to
Suppliers.
and contractors. Yeah. So that's another school of thought that maybe once government opens the floodgates, it could maybe see the situation actually unraveling or changing quite drastically. But yeah, so we also need to be mindful of those risks of challenges that could happen, say, once government begins to, once government, yesterday I think I was seeing the Minister of Transport and Infrastructure mentioning that government is now beginning to implement major road projects, mini interchanges at a number of our roads. So that could have implications in terms of pan supply growth and even sustainability of the macroeconomy or stability of the macroeconomy.
But suppose the government pays in US dollars, because I'm sure they have US dollars.
Yes. That I think that's even better for suppliers. Government, because even if they pay ZiG now, because of the time value of money, there's been loss of value. So that can actually affect the sustainability of the suppliers.
Okay.
But for government, I don't think would exclusively pay in USD. They could pay partly in USD, but probably the larger chunk in ZiG. So actually government benefits now if they pay in ZiG, because that loss of value means that the supplier is actually subsidized government.
Okay.
So government is a greater incentive to actually pay in ZiG.
Okay.
And not necessarily in USD.
All right. So which brings
But
me...
and also now, government may actually award a wage increase.
Okay.
You see what's happening in the UZ. The lecturers are on strike. The government is negotiating with civil servants. So we don't know the outcome, how that's going to come out. But that could also have implications, obviously, in terms of demand supply growth and ultimately the macroeconomy.
Sure. Which brings me to this very important issue. You know, the debate around de-dollarization.
Yes, yes.
In a market where we still have, you know, a dominant USD, as reflected by the bulk of the transactions that are actually happening, do you believe that, you know, the government has got to revise the roadmap towards de-dollarization? Because we had said 2030, by end of 2030, we should be using the local currency only.
De-dollarized, yeah.
Yeah. So do you think that there's need to revise that, or do you think they are still within their targets to achieve
What's
that?
interesting is that the central bank are actually very confident and bullish. They're even saying that the ZiG transactions as a percentage or proportion of the total transactions in the economy have actually increased, which points to de-dollarization already beginning to set in the economy. But 2030, well, it's achievable, but I think let's build a track record. If we can maintain at least below 20%, let's maybe say below 20% inflation, say for the next 2 years, I think it's possible that we can actually de-dollarize. Because by then, it means there will be a lot of confidence and trust in the ZiG because of its ability to retain value. But the ability of a currency to retain value is a function of inflation. So if inflation is low for a long time, it means people have more confidence in that currency and they begin to want to transact more. I think at that point, that's when we'll also see probably things like fuel and even passports being also made available in the local currency. So I think what the government authorities are trying to do first and foremost is to ensure that we build our reserves. Yes, there's been a significant improvement in reserves. They are still a bit inadequate, given that SADC is saying that let's say have at least 3 months import cover. 3 months import cover would be around almost 3 billion, because our imports, the value of our imports per month is around 1 billion or slightly below. So 3 months import cover, that's about probably $2.7 billion worth of reserves. When you compare with countries in the region, Zimbabwe actually probably we are better than Malawi, but Zambia is better than us. Even Botswana is better they have more reserves than us. South Africa, they're averaging around $62 billion worth of reserves. So I think let's build our reserves, but that's a function of production.
Yeah, I was going to go there.
But production, again, is a function of stability, because stability creates an environment where producers can actually produce more. Why? Because the return on investment will be higher in a more stable environment. So the issue of stability and production are critical in terms of sustaining the value of the ZiG and restoration of confidence in the ZiG by economic agents.
Sure. So you said what is critical really to people having the confidence and trust
in
the ZiG
currency
would be maintaining low inflation. And you said, you know, if we can go below 20% in the next
but,
in the next
our
2 years.
optimal inflation rate is around 8%. 8%,
Yeah.
That's like the ideal.
Yeah. So, well, it would be a bridge too far for now.
Talk
about 8%.
Because by year end we're expecting around 26% or 30%. Those are optimistic projections, but the less optimistic projections are projecting around almost 150, 190%.
As an economist, you want to project the future.
Yes.
So, how long would you want to give the authorities to be able to return this country, you know, or the economy to where it was before 2000?
I think that's going to take a bit of time. But I think eventually we'll get there. But let's first get the currency issue right. Then I think that will create the right kind of environment and framework for the economy to begin to create jobs and to be competitive again, and also to address issues of poverty. Because one of the challenges facing Zimbabwe, the high levels of poverty, on account of the high levels of informality. So how do we transition that informality to formality? In fact, according to me, that's one of the biggest structural challenges facing Zimbabwe, the high levels of informality, and we need to address that. Why the high levels of informality is because of a number of factors. Our economy is not creating jobs. We have had deindustrialization, but also even the tax environment has not been conducive. It has not incentivized formalization. Because a lot of the informal businesses are running away from paying taxes, levies, and other charges. I think the tax burden is on the very high side in Zimbabwe, and that's one of the reasons why we have high levels of informality. In fact, a study by the World Bank actually showed that the higher the levels of tax, the higher the tax burden, the higher the levels of informality.
Okay.
So what Trump is doing in America, reducing taxes, I think that's the right way.
Okay. I'm sure we will.
Because that incentivizes
Yeah.
entrepreneurship, innovation,
Yeah.
and aggregate demand, consumption, investments.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
But of course, there's no consensus in economics. There are some who believe that we need higher taxes. Some like us, we believe in lower taxes, lower regulations, even lower regulations.
Sure.
Yeah. Make it easier for businesses and for households to thrive and to be innovative. So remove so many red tapes, a lot of red tape, a lot of regulations.
Okay.
Because by doing that, you're actually promoting innovation. You're incentivizing entrepreneurship.
I hear you. And so, I'll leave it here.
Yes.
Thanks so much for coming to the program.
So it's a pleasure.
Dr. Tambara.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
We can make Zimbabwe great again, but everyone has got to come to the party. Going back to those golden years, it's not going to be a walk in the park, but it can be achieved through pain, sweat, and at times losses. Next week, same time, same station, same presenter. Good night.